Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. If you have your own song you'd like to submit for special selection, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's request comes from Paul. It says, Eternal Glory by First Fragment. And yes, I am using the translated name because I listened to the proper pronunciation for that and I don't have the chops for it. So rather than butcher it, I'll just say the translated name. So we have First Fragment's Eternal Glory. Let's check this out and see what's going on. It also looks like this is track 1 of the album, so this is the intro not just to the song, but to the album itself, I believe. Sounds like we've got waves with this blooming sounds. And it's not moving, it's a static. That's a fat bass tone. What? That is some funky rhythmic syncopation too. And those 16th note palm mute accents between the notes themselves, that's just... Oh, this is so good. If the whole song is like this, I'm set. And like the guitars are providing the percussive element with the palm muted hits. I love the chord progressions too. Not typical metal stuff. This is wild. Okay. Wow. That is groovy. Harsh transition. I'm finding it increasingly difficult to listen to anything but the guitars and bass. Couldn't tell, were those blast beats on the snare? That was too fast. That was double bass kicks, right? Okay, so that's a 17-beat phrase. I like the group vocals. These guys are funky. Bringing in the vocals on this syncopation is genius. A bit comical, but genius. Counterpoint is bonkers. Like, we have a soloing guitar and two supporting melodies. Wait, is it over? It's not over. Oh man, it's over. Oh, that's not fair. I want more. What a ride. So, I mean, this is like, what if Archspire, but also Yngwie Malmsteen? And I think that brings in That brings enough of the classical aspect, and I don't really need to like say plus Beethoven or something like that. This is, well, plus funk. Like, what was up with that? It's so weird how they went with these super syncopated, funky sections, but didn't go with jazzy chords. They kind of stuck with the classical based chord progressions and modes that they were utilizing. Eh, and that was, I mean, this was weird in the best possible way. And guys, I don't use weird often, right? I usually try to find nicer words, unusual or non-traditional, avant-garde, experimental. But no, this was weird. And I liked it. Uh, I don't even know where to begin. Um, let's start with production. I've got production on my mind because we're doing Hi-Fi Black Metal Week. So, I mean, let's just start with this. Most of it, I mean, it's pretty typical, right? We got bass and drum center. We got guitars panned hard to the side. We got vocal centered. But there's also a very sharp cleanliness to all of this, which is necessary. There's a lot of musical information being pumped out at any given second. There's a lot of layers going on, clearly defined areas and roles in both the sound sphere and the mix itself, volume wise. What has the spotlight? I mean, everything needs to be perfectly laid out in order for a lot of this chaos to come through as something that isn't a muddied mess. So a lot of the choices that they have with their production, such as isolating the guitars, hard panned, where they're placing the vocals versus the drums and the bass, giving the bass so much volume. All of it is kind of not something they had a choice in. If they really decided to do anything else, it would not be as clear to listen to. It would be a very different song. In my case, I'd probably look down upon it. I'd comment about how the muddiness of the mix makes it difficult to hear a lot of the complexities that are shining through. And they seem to be a band that is about clarity. And it isn't even just in the production. We'll get into it later when we talk about the performative aspect of it. But there is raw precision and perfection on display here. Every note is perfectly played within the very short window it has to exist before the next note appears perfectly at the beginning of its window and ends at the end of its window. Clarity is a massive aspect of the performance side. I have to guess that it's also a massive component of the production. So, like I said, they didn't really have a choice with the way this was produced, with the way that they laid everything out. They had to go with whatever is going to optimize clarity. But what's interesting to me is that, again, it's the weirdness of it, right? So we have death vocals. At least I think so. They remind me of Archspire and their tech death, so I think it's death style growls. And they're kind of mixed, like I would expect growls to be. They're kind of pushed down. They're not above everything. They're kind of sitting within the same sort of area and range as everybody else. But unlike in some of the death metal we've listened to, where all the instruments kind of come together and kind of hover around the central area, which creates a quasi wall of sound, weightiness to the music. Here, everything has so much space between it. There's so much distance between everything because of the aforementioned clarity that they're trying to achieve. So the vocals are pushed down into a mix that isn't there. And it's interesting to me because I can hear how they're not given prominence. I can hear how volume-wise they're a bit lower than they would be in something more mainstream or radio produced. I can hear how they are given a little bit of extra compression to them to give them more of that crackle, which helps distort some of the core timbre of it and give it that growling edge. And of course that, is about kind of hiding some of the what I kind of assume is hiding some of that human element and bringing and really emphasizing the growl, really emphasizing the static, the compression that's being created that kind of gives it that non-human sound. And or inhuman sound is a good way to word that too. And like all of these elements are kind of there to disguise the vocals. You hide them in the mix. You kind of shave off some of the softer parts and keep the harshness. But it's kind of sitting there out in the open. Like it acts like it's trying to hide, but there's nothing there to help it. And so it's just plain to see and plain, well, I suppose here it'd be plain to hear exactly what it is and what it's doing. And the idea of pushing it into the mix is kind of lost because the mix isn't there to have anything pushed into. The mix is like super wide. All the instruments have distance between each other. And everything is like super clear. So there isn't this song for the vocals to be pushed into to kind of help them hide or disguise a little bit. So it's like poorly hiding in plain sight. And it caught me off guard because to me it's a very stark vocal production style, right? It feels like it's aiming, well actually I think it expertly produces them as if there were this more centralized sound for it to be pushed into. So I can hear that production style, but like the context that it typically requires is not there. So it was like, wow, that's odd. Oh, and then I saw what they were doing. I kind of pieced everything together, and it kind of became a bit of a comedic angle for me. Maybe it's something that I'll get more accustomed to now that I know, what's coming. The next time I check out some First Fragment. I don't think this is the first time I've heard First Fragment, though. I think I've listened to them on my own, because after I put Archspire so high on my Album of the Year list for last year, people were telling me to check out First Fragment. And some people were telling me they were better than Archspire. So I'm pretty sure I've heard a song from them. But I don't remember these vocals. So maybe I just wasn't listening close enough. Maybe it was a different album I checked out. I don't know. But yeah, this kind of caught me off guard. But like I said, maybe it's something that now that I know what's coming, I can be acclimated for it and it won't catch me off guard. Maybe it won't be so comedic. But to me, like I said, it's like watching a toddler try to hide in the middle of the room because they covered their eyes. And I know that's not what they were going for. That's not their intent. I understand that they were just, utilizing typical production for growls. It's just that they need this separation, this clarity for the style of music they're going for. And it just happens to create this sound that gives me this visual. But, it still kind of made me chuckle a little bit. Doubly so when they gave the vocals, when they had the vocals chime in on that super funky syncopated part, because there's just like this bouncy and levity to this weighty growling. Another thing, just like just completely out of the usual for the style, that just caught me off guard, made me chuckle. I think that's the only thing that I really have to talk about production wise. Just the spacing out of everything and then the unusual environment for this type of vocals. But yeah, like I said, everything kind of bleeds into the music, or I suppose I should say the opposite, is that all these decisions come from the music. The spaciousness and clarity are not necessarily things they really had much of a choice over. They had to do it because of the music. And the vocals need this little bit of extra compression to give it a little bit more punch. But the music requires the instruments to be spacious, so the vocals are kind of there by themselves in the middle. So yeah, it's interesting to hear how much of the production is based on the music itself. The type of music they wanted to make dictated how the band should sound. Now, speaking of the music, they move through, well, I guess primarily two modes: classical and funky classical, which is not a phrase I thought I'd ever say in my life, but I'm so glad that I can. The intro, I think, is pure classical. We have two at least clean guitars. Not sure if they were acoustic, certainly clean though. Doing a little duet, harmonizing at some points, bouncing ideas off of each other, providing raw counterpoint at other times. Just this really beautiful dance between the two of them. And it informs everything that we're about to hear. It has the speed, the precision, the complexity, the beautiful chord progressions, kind of giving this classical metal kind of vibe, but with, clean guitars. And then we come out of this and we go into the next section, which is where the electric guitars come in, and this is saying, this is what we're doing. And that's where the everything comes together for their core sound. Now, something I want to talk about with this intro is that there is a lot of palm muting that I don't really remember hearing much of during the rest of the song. A lot of that was pure shred. But during this opening, we had a lot of palm muting, which is sort of that thonky chunking noise, I suppose you could call it. It's holding down. You can either hold down the frets at the top, or the word palm muting comes from the idea of resting your palm on the strings right behind the pickups to mute them, basically, so that you don't actually get a strong tone out of it. It stops the vibrations from happening, so you get the percussive element of striking the pick against the string, but you don't actually get the tone from the string vibrating. And they were utilizing that to create a percussive rhythm underneath the melody that was being played. And what was even crazier was that they were utilizing wild subdivisions in the syncopated aspect. No, they were creating syncopated subdivisions to play against the simple melody. Like, if we had just taken the notes that were played out, that weren't muted, I don't think the melody would have been too complex. But when we start putting those 16th note chugs in the 16th note muted chugs in between these notes, it begins to get more and more complex. And sure enough, I bet you anything, if you watched them perform this, it would just be wild. Because not only are they, moving around notes, they're not really sticking on one note on their left hand, but on their right hand, they're having to do these complex rhythmic structures. Because they're not just playing the eighth notes or the quarter notes, they're also playing these 8th and 16th note percussive strikes and having to, pull their wrist on and off the strings to, allow them to ring out or to mute them. And just, you're talking about three things at once, picking the right note, playing the right rhythm, and making sure that it's muted or not. And it's just wild. But it comes together in an exceptionally beautiful moment. There was one moment where the drummer, I believe, was playing some cymbals to augment the rhythmic component that the guitars were creating with the palm muted hits. But I'm pretty sure that most of the percussive elements in the opening section were handled by the guitars. I'd have to go back and give it another listen. I really tried to lean into it and see what was going on, but I was also trying to pick up on some of the counterpoint melody that was going on, while also, it wasn't super long either. we were quickly moving into the next section, so lots of things to listen for in this track. I'm not going to be able to touch on them all, and unfortunately that's one of the mysteries I'm going to have coming out of this first reaction, is whether or not there were snare or bass kicks happening in the intro. But regardless, the guitars were providing a percussive element, even if it wasn't the only one. And that's still impressive right there. So we move out of that, though, into what I call the meat of the song. Oh, we also, maybe we'll pick this up in the themes section. Maybe when you start analyzing the lyrics. The intro and outro. that warm tone, I guess. It kind of felt like a lot of notes, but I wouldn't call it a chord either. It felt singular. So I'm not really sure what that was, but it never changed. The beginning and the end were the same note, the same tone, and it just kind of fades in and fades out, and we got these waves washing over as well as sort of like an environmental atmospheric component, and not really sure what any of it means, especially not compared to anything else in the music. But like I said, maybe when we start looking at theme and lyrics, I'll pull those in. But then we enter into the meat of the song, which, as far as I can tell, jumps back and forth between classical shred and classical funk. And it's kind of bonkers because like the whole song utilizes layers of counterpoint. And counterpoint is just a fancy term that means that two or more instruments are both playing lead melody lines. And that's kind of it. So, then they have to play two different melody lines. If they're playing the same one, it's just a harmony, right? So if you've ever heard a song and two vocalists are singing different parts, that's counterpoint. If there's a guitar solo, this one actually had a part where there was a guitar solo and then two guitar melody lines, like two lead guitar lines going on. Just bonkers amounts of musical information being tossed out at any one time. And we'll get to that. But yeah, counterpoint or counter melody is another way of saying it, is a huge component of the song. At any given time, there is usually at least two melodic elements going on simultaneously. Sometimes they're harmonizing with each other, but it's not an entire lick. It's not like the entire riff is providing harmony to each other. Maybe it's a bar each. Maybe they'll line up, and then this guy will like diverge and go do something wild, and then line back up, and then this one will diverge, and we kind of have this call and response element where one solos, and then they come together to harmonize for a second, or even play the same thing in one case. And then the other one diverges. And so we have this sort of concept in these sections because the guitars are panned so hard. It's kind of like veering off to a side and coming back in, and then veering off to the other side. And it's really interesting of how the different sides of the speaker will pull my attention towards them. But then there's other moments where they're just doing their own thing completely. Just both of them going off on their own little world, going on their own journeys. And it's fascinating because it's typically not highlighted. This happened during the lead guitar solo section at like 5 or 6 minutes in, pretty close to the end. It also happened in multiple sections where where the vocalist was providing the lead spotlit element. Just volume-wise, they were louder than the two guitarists, and they kind of get pushed down a little bit volume-wise. They feel a bit muted, but they're still just tearing it up, doing their own thing. And I wonder how much of the lowered volume helped with the palatability of it. Because one, it allows a casual listener to kind of ignore them. They just kind of provide the noise in the background to whatever you're listening to in the foreground, whether that's the bass or the guitar solo or the vocalist, whatever your eye is going to, that's kind of leading the song at the moment. But also, it allows any tension or dissonance, any dyad that ends up getting played that isn't, that might provide a bit of dissonance to what's being, to the music, to not really be heard. However, a lot of the time they are just kind of running through these sections, lots of 8th and 16th notes, just very fast playing. And as I've mentioned before, especially when it comes to notes outside of a key or outside of a chord, or any time that you're playing notes that just don't fit together, the faster you can get off of them, the better, unless you're really aiming to be dissonant. And that way you can get the extra kick, the extra spiciness out of playing a note that doesn't fit, without having to introduce a lot of that, the warble that comes with the dissonance, that the part of the the combination of notes that people don't like. um, Typically don't like. Let me say that way. There's a couple of metal genres that apparently are created completely off of dissonance, and I assume people listen to them for pleasure. You know, they're not trying to, make themselves cringe or whatever. But dissonance to me is it needs to be used tastefully. It's not something I typically enjoy listening to. Um, but yeah, so they're playing fast, so any impact of the dissonance that might be created isn't really felt or heard regardless. But it's also kind of pushed down a little bit into the mix, so you can't hear it anyways. So I wonder how much of that goes into their writing. Granted, they seem to know exactly what they're doing. Their chord progressions are beyond what most metal and rock musicians perform. They're not utilizing any standard four chord progressions that are blues based or rock and roll based. They're definitely using some really interesting chords to create these textured progressions that I don't hear too often in this genre. They know what they're doing. I am going to assume that somebody in the band has a little bit of theory background, if not classical composition background. So I don't want that to come off as me saying that they lowered the volume and played fast so that any mistakes wouldn't be damaging to the song because they don't know better, but just because it gives them a little bit of extra leeway. But also, coming back at it from the production angle of cleanliness, of clean, of clarity, uh, you need to have background elements. If every instrument is performing a lead line and you treat them all like lead elements, it's going to be muddy. So some of the instruments, when they play faster, even when they play lead elements, lead melodies, they have to be pushed down under the spotlit lead elements. So that could be another reason why they reduce the volume in some of the sections for the two guitars doing counterpoint. But yeah, just when you listen to First Fragment, check out, really listen in to the two side pan guitars, not the lead one that's doing the soloing, the two side pan ones though, and really listen to what they're doing at any given point in time. Every section of this song, they're playing counterpoint with each other. It is kind of bonkers how many lines have been written, assuming even if this extends past this song into an entire genre or even their entire work of art, their entire works of art. How many melody lines they must have written because they feel like they're different throughout this track. It feels like a linear track to me. Is what I'm saying here. So it's very possible that they've written 5-6 melody lines per instrument for this song. So we're probably looking at somewhere close to 15 or 16 lead melody lines, not riffs. I mean, some of them are repeated once or twice, but we're not looking at a 4-bar riff that gets repeated 30 or 40 times in a song. We're looking at something lengthy that might get repeated once before moving into the next idea. And so we're looking at, like I said, 15, 16 riffs per song. Figure there's 8, 9, 10 tracks per album. And assuming that they keep this up, I mean, we're looking at 150 melodic ideas for an album alone, which is not unusual for classical, but is a huge amount for a metal album. And that just kind of blows my mind. Let's see, what's next though? Melodic writing, production, counterpoint, the bass, man. I don't know that I got a lot to say about it. It had some really, really sick runs. Absolutely love the bass work in here. I love how they gave it the spotlight not once, but twice. And even when it didn't have the spotlight, it wasn't buried in the mix. The lower notes were a bit more difficult for me to hear. I'm going to blame both my ears and my headphones on that one. But once it kind of went up to about the 3rd or 4th string, a bit higher in its range, it became very clear, very loud, and it just had this nice, wide warmth to it. Now, it was a very wide sound. It was a that bass tone 100%. But I don't think it ever really overdid it. Some of the higher notes I think could have been held back just a hair. They did seem to overpower everything else. And it was uncharacteristically not entire lines, but literally like the two highest notes were just so much louder than everything else around it. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe that was the point, to bring prominence to the height. I don't know. But it definitely felt a bit out of line with the rest of the bass work that was going on. But like I said, it never really reaches that point of being too much, right? Volume wise, maybe a little bit, but not width, right? Not impact. It is a punchy bass tone, and I love it. And like I said, I love the lines too. Much like the guitarists, the bassist is just wildly talented and just plays some real sick stuff from start to finish. I mean, I don't think the bass showed up during the opening clean guitar duet, but as soon as the electric guitars kicked in, the bass took over. It's like, oh, we're we turned on our amps, we've turned on our pedals, let's go, and just takes the spotlight right out of the gate. So great. Where was I going with all this though? Yeah, I thought we were talking about the music. I remember I was talking about the classical versus the funky stuff. Let's get back to that. I mean, while I'm talking about instruments, the drummer is fantastic. It's wild stuff in there. I still got to get some clarification on that blast beat. It felt too fast to be a blast beat on the snare, but it also had to be one-handed because there's just some cymbal work going alongside it. So I've got to think it was a double bass kick, but I mean, it kind of didn't have the low end that I would expect out of a bass kick. It did have a bit of a snare aspect to it, but I mean, there's just no way someone could play snare that fast with one hand. I don't know. You guys got to let me know about that one. Hit me up with a drum cam or something. I got to see what's going on there. It was earlier on, like 3.5, 4 minutes in maybe. It was just bonkers. Drummer's killing it though. Vocalist killing it. I mean, they got one style and they do it very well. I think it fits what they're playing interestingly. And we'll get to this later too about some of how I feel about this with how the vocals feel against the music. Don't let me, well, you guys can't talk to me. It's kind of a one-way conversation. I'm going to write this down. I got to remind myself. Vocals versus music. I hope I remember what that means later. So yeah, we have straight classical versus funky classical, and that's sort of what this section jumps around between often. And oh yeah, I think that's how we were going into this, because the straight classical uses a lot of counterpoint. And we just did like a whole section on counterpoint. But the funky section, everybody kind of comes together to emphasize the same rhythmic syncopation. And I absolutely loved, we had done like 2 or 3 of these sections, and like the third or fourth one comes in though, and they bring in the new funky idea, right? They bring in this new syncopated rhythm, and I'm like, all right, I can jam with this. I absolutely love it. You guys have done 3 before that were phenomenal. I can't believe we got another one in here. Let's go for it. And then the vocalist starts to growl against this rhythmic idea, and it's just the levity and bounciness of the music versus the weightiness and power of the vocals was so great. Oh man. But yeah, but what else is weird about this is that funk is a jazz subgenre. And funk typically has its own styles of chord progression that are more in line with what jazz does. But they retained the classical melodic and chordal ideas, but just use the syncopation of funk. Or I guess in another way, they use the syncopation of djent. I never realized that djenty is the funk of music. Djent is the funk of music. Djenty. Yeah, djent is the funk of music though. That's a weird revelation to make today. But yeah, so it's kind of strange to me hearing these rhythmic components, especially bass-led. Funk is a very bass-led genre. It has a lot of these trappings of funk. It just doesn't use the musical language. And it's kind of bonkers that it works so well. But it really does. And, just like with the melodic components, talking about how many strong melodies they have to write, not just alone, but also as counterpoint. They have to be able to work together. We have 4 funky syncopated rhythms in here. They have a whole album to fill up. Again, assuming that this is their style, it's present throughout most of the song. Most of the album. That is a lot of syncopated rhythms to write that at least I'm hoping don't get old. Here, there's definitely some similarities between how they create the syncopated aspect of it, but each of them felt unique. And, I'm just trying to think about how many times you can write something that fits this idea and for it to still feel unique by the time you finish a 10-track album. And, I don't put it past them. I think they can. This is a brilliant group of people, but it also is a Herculean task to try to make so many ideas that work, that are as complex as they want them to be, right? They don't put simplicity in their music. And to keep it feeling fresh. Maybe not even just for a full album, maybe for their entire discography. How do you keep coming up with stuff that doesn't feel stale? I don't know. I got to dive into more of First Fragment, that's for sure. But yeah, so the whole funky classical part is just really strange to me, but I think it's also a really nice juxtaposition to the straight classical that we get and the rest of it. We go from pure shred, which is mind-melting. They just constantly, it's not even just the chord progressions, because they do use some really interesting chords. It is also the performance of it, just being able for the drummer to just lay down these ridiculously fast ideas. It's the shredding that's going on in the guitarists. And again, the precision of it all, the perfection of it all. I don't doubt that these guys can put this together live and be as precise as this music needs them to be. If you hit a beat or if you hit a note just a beat earlier, just a beat late, it's going to feel muddy. Everybody needs to be perfectly in sync, especially when you're playing these 16th notes at this fast tempo. You're touching on the note for just a hair of a second. So being late means that you're also going to hang over with that note, because not even like you can say, oh, I came in late, I'm just going to release on time, because by the time you've come in, everybody else has already released to hit the next note. So it can get very muddy very quick if everybody isn't perfect, which is not a word I like to use when talking about music. Nobody is perfect. There's going to be flubs, but you can practice to reach a point where the flubs are not going to have much of an impact on the music, which I can't even know what that sounds like here, given how tight, how tightly dense, how densely packed their music is. But they've obviously done it. They put shows on, and I'm sure it sounds just as good as this. So any mistakes they are making, and I want to clarify that people make mistakes. I don't want to say that this band's not good enough to play their music. Nobody can play their music or anybody's music perfectly 100% every time, right? They're going to make mistakes, but whatever mistakes they do end up making are not heard by the audience, which is the way you want it to be. Trust me. As somebody who's made mistakes on a stage, you try your best just to make the audience believe that it was intentional. And when you're playing this fast, it's something you can just breeze by, hopefully. But I think it'd be also really difficult to get back in groove with what everybody else is doing, just because, like I said, how fast everything is. So, yeah, just kind of mind-boggling. But like I said, it's extremely precise, extremely perfect and clean. And so we go from this like super rigid cleanliness into this super funky, laid back almost, right? We go from this inhuman precision to this very human chill, just kind of vibing kind of idea. It's very emotional, I would say. And that's not to say that there's no emotion in the straight classical stuff. It's just more rigid. And so, at least coming at it from a performance aspect, it feels more robotic. There isn't really a lot of room for expression. Whereas when we get to the syncopated stuff and it's kind of funky, it makes me want to move my body. It's not so much of just like this rigid headbang, and it's like, grooving with it. It's vibing. It's this emotion of connecting with the emotion of the emotion of connecting with the emotion. You are a wordsmith, Bryan. It's the emotion of connecting with the rhythmic component, right? And you just want to or at least I just want to move my body with it. It is groovy, right? And it's this huge separation, this huge diversion from where we're at, and to constantly bounce between these two. I'm really hoping that the song, the lyrics, are about some sort of duality, because the music is very strongly about that. It's about this rigid drive, and then like this loose, I don't want to say free form, but just a general looseness, more of a vibe than a drive, if that makes sense. And I'm hoping to see this element in the lyrics to tie the lyrics into the music, which actually, yeah, there's two ways this can go down. This is either their style and all of their songs do this and we won't see these themes in the lyrics, or it's expressly created for this song because of the lyrics and we don't see the funky aspect as much through the rest of the album, which kind of removes my idea of, how wild it is to create all of this unique stuff when this one is actually, not seen throughout the album. Anyways, we're like 46 minutes in. We talked about the music, the styles, the production, the performance, vocals versus music. I'm glad I wrote that down. We're gonna talk about this real quick, and then we're gonna head into the lyrics and wrap this guy up. So the music is very bright and uplifting to me. There's definitely a bit of a metal edge to it, sonically, but the notes themselves are mostly bright. And it kind of contrasts real hard with the growling for me. Taking, for instance, Archspire, they tend to use a lot more darkness in the music, which I think fits the growls better. Just a personal preference. I have a difficult time. Maybe it's because I'm not used to growls still. They are a vocal style that I do not really appreciate on their own yet. Well, let me take that back. I don't like them on their own. I appreciate them for sure. There's artistic, a performance behind it, and it has emotive elements to it, and it's difficult to do, the technicality of it. But it's not something I enjoy on its own. I enjoy it when it's paired with specific emotions or atmospheres or vibes to amplify what the music is doing. Maybe once I get used to it as its own thing, maybe I'll view this in a different light. But as it stands right here, it feels at odds to me. And like I said, I know it's a biased thing, not pointing the band, docking points for this or anything like that. I don't do points on this channel. Maybe I should start giving ratings to everything. No, that's not very critical. That's a bit more cynical. I don't like that. Anyways, I'm not using this as a negative, is what I'm saying. But it feels very weird to have this weight and this darkness in the growls being paired with this brightness, this uplifting element in the music. It really is the electric guitar that, at least to me, kind of ties the growls to the song in the slightest. And it really is the slightest. If we replace the electric guitars with, well, let's just put in, a string trio or a string quartet. That'd be a trio, wouldn't it? The two guitars and the bass. And we get rid of the drum kit. And we put a bit of an auxiliary percussion set back there. And we got an upright bass and a snare and, a cymbal. We kind of get rid of, we can keep the double bass kicks and assuming that they're blast beats, we can keep those as well. Like, we'll keep all the notes. We'll just change the instrumentation. I think the growls would feel very out of place because musically it would feel like uplifting Renaissance style classical. So, at least to me, there's this disconnect between the emotions of the vocals and the emotions of the music that I think the growls work better when this style of music, really fast, really technical, counterpoint, all that stuff, has a bit of a darker tone to it that matches what the growls are doing. So to me, that was another thing that kind of stood out with the vocals, not just their production, but also the musicality of it all. And again, like I said, just my bias, not saying it's a negative on the band or anything like that. It was just another oddity for me. I think that this music, in my mind, would work better with clean vocals. But at the same time, I totally understand that adding another clean melodic instrument to this mix would be, it'd be difficult to balance. Not even just production wise, but creating another melodic component. Whereas as the band stands right here, the vocals are more of a textural rhythmic one. So they double up what the drums are doing rather than doubling up, quadrupling up what the two guitars and bass are doing. And occasionally having a third guitar in there with the lead guitar. So yeah, if it was a clean vocal, we have 5 melodic elements at points. Really difficult to handle that production wise or composition. But it's something that I got to get used to, I suppose, if I continue listening to First Fragment or bands like this. So let's dive into the lyrics here. It is in French. I have a translation here. Unfortunately, it looks like a lot of the cool everything about the lyrics are lost in translation. There's some nice, what I'm going to assume are rhythmic structures, actually repeated structures, are repeated syllabic structures going on in the chorus. That's not really a chorus. There is no chorus. This is a linear track. Anyways, there's a piece in the middle that has a lot of words that end in the letter A, and I assume that there's a really nice flow to it. And in English, it is, well, it's less flowing. And there's also some rhythmic stuff that gets changed up massively in the transition as well. So definitely not a song that works as well poetically in English. But here we go. Let's dive into this. My spirit detached from my body and flew towards the horizon. At the end of my setbacks, I reached the threshold of my obsolescence. I woke up after an eternity of swimming in stagnation. I left my cradle for new effervescences. Pulled out of my chrysalis, I defy myself of my carnal being. Then my eclecticism led me to eternal glory. So this is a very flowery way of saying that my spirit left my body. And now I'm already hooked, right? Why? Why did the soul leave? You know, what event caused this? Massive vocabulary here. Despite the amalgamation of the multiple transformations that I had undergone, that's cool. I like that phrase. My sharp aim will forever be focused on my fatality. So despite the process of how my soul and body were separated, all I can focus on is my death. Interesting. The toxicity of my environment fought relentlessly against my wanderings. The pangs of despair were no match for my stubbornness. That one's less clear to me. I mean, I guess it's saying that his world, the people around him, or the rulers, leaders that he has, his environment, as he states it, was toxic. So he didn't like the way the world was. And the pangs of despair are no match for my stubbornness. I don't know. Anyways, this is the part that I thought was really cool, that did not translate so well in English. It says, glory emerged, burst. Glory intoxicated me, transported me. Glory lifted me up, took me away, captivated by its pageantry. Glory detached me, emancipated me. Glory burned me, consumed me. Glory hurt me, killed me. I dive into the afterlife. Looking at the French words here, like I said, I can't understand the words. My pronunciations are probably way off, but there is a series of words that end in A. And it looks like a lot of them might be two syllables each. Nope, there doesn't really seem to be much of a pattern with syllable, but it does have this constant A at the end of every word, and I want to go back and listen to it and kind of hear how that rolls off, because it seems like there's this really nice soft rhyme scheme to this entire section that kind of brings it all together, whereas in English it's just like a series of words. So anyways, this idea of glory is probably what pushed his stubbornness. Right? He says the pangs of despair are no match for my stubbornness. This stubbornness was his drive for glory. I'm going to assume glory intoxicated him. It lifted him up. It detached him, but it also freed him. It burned him. It consumed him. It hurt him. Glory killed him. So whatever drive he had to do, the action that he was driven to perform is what led to his death. Faced an uncertain end, I continued the advance. I couldn't suppress the taste of my curiosity. I gathered my momentum and jumped head down. That sounds dangerous. I came face to face with the enemy of my subconscious. I got cut to pieces by my tireless persistence. I passed away for a moment. I restored my body and rose once again from the dead. I was ready for the big climb, for the beginning of my last tribulations. To get to the top, I had to disregard of my greatest fears and climbing each rung. So, see, I have a question here. He speaks about what I'm going to assume is vertigo, his greatest fear of heights, possibly. He speaks about getting to the top. We have a big climb. There's also something else in here that kind of like mountainy, maybe. Maybe not. Anyways, I don't know if this is a metaphor or not. It could be literally being a mountain climber, or it could just be speaking about the task. Whatever task is at hand is as difficult, and it needs to be climbed. The hurdle needs to be surpassed, right? You need to get over it. The storm raged more and more violently. The sharp ice pierced my skin. The scarcity of oxygen was increasing, but giving up was not an option. So we are literally talking about climbing a mountain, but I kind of get the feeling the metaphor is still appropriate. The summit waited impatiently for my coming, so I mutated once more and set out to conquer the Empyrean. My spirit detached from my body and flew towards the horizon. At the end of my setbacks, I reached the threshold of my obsolescence. This is the opening. Yeah. So he repeats the opening. So we actually start in media res, which is interesting. We start at the moment where he's died and his spirit gets ripped out of his body, and then he goes back. He says, "This is what brought me here." Right? And that's what in media res is. It just means that you start in the middle of the action. There's lots of movies, novels, video games. I mean, it's a very common way to start a story because, even music, right? We talk about in modern pop that we start songs in the chorus so that we can get the person hooked before bringing them into the verse, which is usually a little lower energy. It's all about starting in the action to get people interested, and then you hit them with the not as interesting part, which in movies or in stories would be the exposition, right? So you start with the big question, or you start with the action, and then you're like, oh, how'd they get here? And then like, oh, let's explain that. We go on the journey. So you always have this question at the back of your mind: how does this lead to what I know is the end? So there's definitely a lot of precedence into why in media res is so popular, but I don't think I've ever heard it done in a song before, lyrically. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, it looks like there's, like I said, still possible this element of metaphor of climbing over a huge hurdle, but there's also a literal mountain that he appears to be climbing. He talks about the sharp ice piercing his skin, the scarcity of oxygen becoming an issue, and eventually he passes out on this mountain and dies, and his spirit gets sucked out from his body. It could be that this drive for glory is to climb a mountain, be the first to climb it or something like that. Interestingly, though, I don't see how any of this ties into the music. I mean, there's the idea of the spirit being ripped away and then kind of hovering there, and then looking at the camera and being like, "You might wonder why I'm outside my body." So then we have like this frame story where the narrator is the spirit of the guy, but then we see the story through, we see the story of him when he was still physical. That kind of split idea right there, right? Where we're hearing the story from the spirit side, but we're watching the story from the physical side. And that could be the classical versus the funkiness. But honestly, I think that's reading way too far into it. I think it's just their style, right? They got the straight classical, the shredding metal stuff, and then they got the funky syncopated rhythmic stuff. And they just kind of bounce back and forth between them. I don't really see too much. I mean, even when we look at like the growls with the brighter music, I said that there's a divide there. I don't know. I'm not seeing a lot of that in music. I mean, in the lyrics. To me, they're two parts of the song. They don't necessarily influence one another. It could be that they were both done at separate times. The lyricist wrote this out, the band wrote their music, and they said, you know what? It kind of fits together. Let's just do it. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm getting out of it. But yeah, I think it's a pretty straightforward tale that I think is interesting because it uses in media res, which, like I said, is not really something I've heard done in lyrics before. It's a narrative tool. And while lyrics can be used narratively, they kind of aren't. They're more poetic. It's not so much about establishing a timeline. So I think that's why they don't get used as often. Anyways, that wraps it up for me. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up with your comments. Let me know what you thought of this track. Let me know if you thought I was right or wrong. Anything that I spoke about that you want to comment on. Let me know your opinion, your side of the conversation. Go ahead and do that. Above the comment section, there's a description box, and there's a link for Linktree, which takes you to this beautiful menu right here. Yeah, it's beautiful, right? I mean, it's a gray gradient, but gray can be beautiful. You can pick up some merch. You can follow me on Twitter. You can join the Patreon. You can submit your own special selection. There's a lot of links in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. We're going to be looking at some more hi-fi black metal. We're going to check out another special selection while we're at it. Till next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.